This is the final word with Jeff Lemon and Adam Collins. Now, we managed to do one daily show about the West Indies India test in Dominica, which I thought was pretty good going. I thought initially, we might get to do a show or two about it, but it was all done in 3 days, basically about 2 hours after we'd loaded the day two version of the daily. The game was done. West Indies bowled out a second time for nothing, an absolute walkover in 3 days, and that was 7 for Ashwin in the second innings, so ends up with 12 for the match. A thumping.
It ends up being one of those test matches where you talk more about the numbers than you do about the cricket. So India went on to make 421 for 5 declared, so they added about a further 100 runs. But at that same sort of
real slow,
turgid strike rate. And the one thing I want to note is that what we didn't hoover up in the Daily Show, just how slow the pitch was, and it was hard to get the game moving along, which reflects why after the ball got old and soft that they were able to just rotate through very slow bowlers. And
I liked that they were willing to pull the plug. I liked that they were willing to say, Ravichandran was willing to say, look, we've got 400, that'll be fine.
Yeah, and so it proved. I mean, they bowled him out for 130 the second time around. Jaiswal doesn't get to join the 6 others that have made a double hundred on debut. He was out for 171. I thought Kohli was a lock and said as much, but he was dismissed for 76 to Rakeem the Dream. So yes, Tip Foster's 287 is safe. We did talk about triple hundreds on debut briefly, and the fact that no one had done it, and if they were going to make 700, Jaiswal might have been a decent pop at that, given how stable he looked. But not. Today.
Is it Lawrence Rowe, and is it in his second test that he makes the 314?
He made a double in his sorry, not Lawrence Rowe made a double on 100 on test debut. Didn't
yes,
he? So he's
and
one
then,
of
and then some. He has the highest total of runs after 2 innings or something like that.
Yeah. So, and there was also the highest opening score ever. He's 5th best on that list behind Brendan Kuripu, who will be there forever, I think, at the top of the pops with 201 not out for Zimbabwe against Sri Lanka at Colombo in 87. So, Tip Foster. Around. What did I say? Did I get the
Zimbabwe against Sri Lanka?
That's what I meant. Yes. So,
as in Kuripu was playing for Sri Lanka.
Right.
Yes,
you know what I'm saying.
I know what you mean.
You know what I mean.
I'm with you.
But yeah, that it was slow was mostly a function of the circumstances, which is why it was so hard to get the ball out to the rope. But yeah, West Indies all out 130 after being all out 150. Alec Athanasi 28. Athanase, we're going with Athanase.
I think that's what we settled.
28 after making 47, so not a bad debut in context of a side that was falling over around him. The Windies lose by an innings and 141, which is India's biggest win by an innings outside of Asia. Just noting on the way through that Jason Holder made 20 not out from 50 balls in the second dig. What a strange career. I mean, Jason Holder is now 31, and you would imagine he's going into
50 not out from 20
Sorry, 20 not out from 50
not out
balls.
from 50
Let's
balls.
go with
Okay,
that.
Yeah. It's backwards day.
I'm transposing my bits and bobs here. So the point here is that, I just saw that and thought about Jason Holder for a moment. The way he burst onto the scene against Australia mostly in 2015 at Port of Spain. No, it was at Sabina Park, wasn't it? Making a brisk 80-odd, looking dangerous enough with the ball, not through pace but through discipline. Having been
there a couple of years there,
he was Test captain. He was the number 1 ICC all-rounder in the world for a number of years.
He was taking his wickets at 16 for a couple of years.
Absolutely. So you kind of go through his life cycle in the Windies team, now a member of the ranks, and I don't know, how long does he remain a Test player for? How long does he hold off the lure of taking his game on the road and becoming a T20 specialist? I'd assume he'd still have a fair bit of currency on that market.
Right.
It might be a symptom of the broader challenges that West Indies cricket are going through and have gone through over the last decade.
I've just checked my Lawrence Rowe bit because that was bugging me. It's the double 100 in the first innings and the 100 not out in the second innings.
I felt like he didn't make a triple.
No, he made 314 runs in the test for once out. Yeah. And then in his third innings, he's on 22. So he ends up on, he averages 338 at one point in Test cricket, which I think might be the highest anyone's ever averaged in Test cricket.
Good to know. Glad we put a full stop on
that.
Glad
we cleared that up. Rule the line under that.
Let's do some Ashwin binging.
Well, I just want to back up on Jason Holder, because I'm with you that there's this kind of sadness in it's there in following West Indies cricket, but it's also there in seeing like someone who is such a good player and has been such a good player in different ways at different times. Also, being the one who's just shouldering the load the whole time. He's having to carry a team around, and obviously it affects his own performances, like seeing him get absolutely taken apart by the Dutch in that qualifier for the One Day World Cup. And like, imagine coming off the flatness of that performance, not qualifying for the 50 over World Cup after not qualifying for the main stage of the 20 over World Cup only 6 months or 9 months earlier, and then coming into a test series and having to sort of to try to get yourself up to do it again. It's deflating.
Well, look, we've reached this point of the conversation. We might go back to Ashwin and stay with the Windies. There's this existential dread that follows them at the moment. So when they have a poor performance like this, there's the rush to say they should be disbanded.
Shut it down.
So 9 decades of history and test history for most of that should be just dashed in favour of the islands or the countries, rather, breaking up and playing as associate nations. But for what purpose? So that they would be taken yet further off Broadway, so that they would join a pool of countries who don't get anywhere near the degree of or number of fixtures that they should in the first place. There is no upside in the Windies disbanding. The focus of global cricket should be how do we provide support to the Windies, not how do we operate them as a small market, as a concept,
a small market that doesn't have the kind of financial clout. And when you're hearing this kind of condescending speech about, maybe if they were playing for their countries, they would have more pride in the shirt, and that would affect the performance. You know what might affect the performance? It might be adequate funding, might be a grassroots system that works. Like, how do people from the 3 richest cricket countries in the world sit there and say a bit more national pride? That's what would do it. A bit more intangible sort of nothing. A bit more things that aren't actually measurable. Heart, guts and determination, all this kind of nonsense.
Do their wives come on tour?
Yeah, exactly. They're being distracted by having families on tour, as opposed to actual professional development of athletes so that they're trained, so that they're mentally and physically prepared to be able to compete. Like, there's one big difference between the teams at the top of the ecosystem and the rest of them, and I don't need to draw a dollar sign in the air for you to figure out what it is.
Or draw a pie chart for that matter. The funding model that we've talked about a lot in the last month or so has been signed off at the meeting, the ICC meeting this week of the chief executives and chairman. I mean, funny that. When you see, we've gone through it many times, but to back over it again, countries in need, there should be a counter-cyclical sort of approach to where the money is distributed amongst full members and associate members. That shouldn't just go to bolster the wealth of already very wealthy boards, especially the one that controls the global game. That doesn't make any sense, and it means that in this case you've got an Indian side that's all powerful and a Windy side that's never really any chance of performing against them. And it's sad, and you're right, there is that sense that it's getting worse. We saw that in Australia last year. Brat and I recorded the Daily Show after the Test match at Adelaide, and it might be the most downbeat episode of The Final Word ever recorded. We were gutted for the way that the Windies aren't able to compete at the moment. But the conversation should move to fixing that and finding ways to get involved and intervening in that, not to, how do we, you're right, that patronising idea of, maybe they'll have a crack if they're playing for Jamaica and Barbados and Antigua and so on. They already do that. They play domestic cricket for their countries. They have that. That's part of their pathway. Then they get to represent the West Indies, and you don't need to sort of be told, if you know anything about the history of the game in the 20th century and indeed the 21st, when you saw them win those T20 World Cups, just how much it means for them to play under the banner of the West Indies, and reductive reasoning that, they're rubbish, therefore they don't care. Well, it's just that.
Or that it's an inevitable trajectory that, they've been no good in this test match, therefore they'll be no good forever. Well, that's where intervention comes in. That's where the need to help teams and to help cricketing nations, as they are still a cricketing nation in that sense, to be able to help themselves, to not be sidelined.
And one pundit jumped in on this associate member junk, and George Tabell quickly got in and noted that, the West Indies have won a global trophy, an ICC trophy, more recently than India's men's last. I mean, it's not for nothing that it's not that long ago that they were a case study in winning T20 tournaments.
It's 2016.
It's not that long ago. And I know we're talking about a different format of the game here, and their decline in Test cricket's been a far longer one. But until 24 months ago, or maybe even 12 months ago, they were making strides in the Test game. So it isn't completely intangible. But yeah, they're at a low ebb at the moment.
Just to wander off for a second on the ICC meeting stuff. So also nothing about Afghanistan out of that. They'll just get their big allotment of money, and that's fine. Apparently everything's going swimmingly there with the Taliban. And the good bit of news we had coming out of that was equal prize money across the ICC tournaments for men's and women's cricket. Now, it's one of those things that sort of looks more meaningful than it is in a way, because the prize money goes to the teams that win it, and the teams that win it are likely to be the teams from the richest countries that are least likely to need the prize money. But there should still be some level of prize money for the countries that come in lower down the table, which means that at least there's some disbursement going out. It'll go out to those boards. Whether that means it actually makes its way to the players or is invested properly, the chances of that reduce depending how competent the administration is in different places.
Yeah, look, it's to be welcomed, it's to be celebrated, but there's not to be you don't go overboard with this, right? Women's cricket lives and dies by the structures that are put around national contracts and domestic systems. We've got a multi-speed economy in women's cricket because the most amount of investment that's been put in is by Australia, then England, and then at the moment India, which is great, but historically not the case, and then it falls away. So where the real attention should be is giving countries the ability to, where it's possible, to invest at a similar level to those who are at the top of the tree. It's great that we have equal prize money. They've been on this path for a number of years. It was a target by 2030, so they're going to get there, half a decade early. It was probably kick-started by what happened at 2017. Claire Connor has spoken before about, I can't remember the figure that they put out there for 17. Whatever it was a huge improvement on 13. She didn't expect it to get through, and it got through. And at the time, it was a sign of where I think James Sutherland was quite important in that, if I recall correctly, when he was still the chief executive of CA, when they made that decision, probably in 2016, before he moved on the next summer. But yeah, the prize money is only one thing. I don't want people to read that last week or see that announcement and think that it's all hunky-dory in the funding of women's cricket down the chain. That's not the case. This is just one piece of the puzzle.
It's one of the optics things, right? Like it looks bad when you have that disparity that, okay, if men's team's winning this tournament, we'll get this, women's teams will get that.
That's it.
And of course, you'll always get the arguments from people who say, oh, well, when they make as much money as the men, then they should get more prize money, which is, obviously doesn't make any sense when you've got a men's game that's had 200 years head start in terms of becoming a commercially viable enterprise, and when it's there are a lot of people who follow cricket who still think fundamentally that women shouldn't be playing sport at all.
Or they should be getting 60% of prize money from major tennis tournaments because they play best of 3, not best of 5. All these arguments have been dispensed with over the last 10 to 15, 20 odd years maybe. They don't get the same amount of airtime. Like when the Australian Open first moved to equal pay, I remember it was a big deal because of that.
Right.
Now, if you try
as though it's the choice of the women tennis players to only play 3 sets, as if they wouldn't want to play a 5 set. They don't get to play 5 sets because the broadcasters and the schedulers of the tournament don't want them to play 5 sets because they would find it harder to fit the games in across a day.
To go to your point, imagine you tried to construct a tournament now where there wasn't equal prize money, right? So, this is a nice step along the way. But just going back to Ashwin before we move off the India West Indies conversation from before. So he finishes with 12 for 131 match figures after 7 for 71 the second time around. His best figures away from home. He's 33rd and 34th 5-wicket bag in Test cricket, so equal with Harath on that measure. Only behind Murali in his 67, Warren with 34, Hadley 36 and Kumble 35. His 8th 10-wicket match, now level with Kumble in top spot for Indians by that measure. But Jeff, the bit I'm most interested in, and I know you and I have been both going through this for seemingly, 3 years now since they both reached the 400s. Lyon was held up in the 390s, got to 400 against England after that poor series against India, is who would reach 500 first. So Ashwin, 486, Lyon, 496. They've been kind of going stroke for stroke. Then Lyon pulled away and got a pretty healthy lead after Delhi. We all thought it was going to come in this Ashes series. He's torn his calf. Ashwin's still got one more test in the Caribbean. He's got over 100 international wickets against the West Indies. He's on 486. He took 14 this week. 14 more next week. He's done.
We took 12 this week.
Oh, sorry, 12.
But he could take 14. It's not beyond the realms of possibility. I suppose that the other venues are less spin friendly than Dominica was, but Port of Spain, you might get.
I could see it.
You could get some assistance.
But if he falls short, right? If he gets to 490 6 as well, let's say. India don't play Test cricket again until they play South Africa, I'm pretty sure. Right. So there's a bit of time.
Okay.
There's a bit of time. I think they play that series, although I'm not entirely certain. I think they play that series against South Africa before Australia play their Test matches against Pakistan, which start on like the December or
16 or something. Yeah, mark. That's pretty deep.
So they'll keep going, those two, the old veterans, the old champions, and one of them they'll both reach 500 eventually, but it might be Ashwin that gets there first after all.
And how much would you have you just didn't think it was going to be anything else than Lyon because he was never injured.
And Ashwin keeps getting left out of sides at the same time, right?
Yeah. So if Ashwin had played the World Test Championship final, maybe wouldn't have taken 14, but he might have taken 5 or 6 in the match.
Still bewildering that he was left out for that game. I'm never going to come to terms with how they left Ashwin out that week.
Never going to give you up. Never going to leave you out.
Not our boy Ashwin.
Okay, so he's got a dozen. How many of his Test hundreds has he made against West Indies? 4.
4 of the 6. 4 of the 5. 4 of the 6. So he got 3 in the space of one tour.
He got 1 against England in Chennai.
1 in Chennai. I feel like he might have made 1 against somebody else. But yeah, you're right. Your point's strong that the Windies are who he loves to clean up against.
Bogey team. What's the opposite of a bogey team?
No, he's got the Midas Touch against them.
See, people always say this, but the Midas Touch is a bad thing. Oh. Midas Touch, if you have the Midas Touch, King Midas wishes to have the power that everything he touches turns to gold.
Right.
And the moral of the story is that he becomes completely miserable because he kills his family because he accidentally turns them into gold, and he can't eat food because every time he picks it up to eat it, it turns to gold, and everybody around him is turned to gold, and he's miserable.
Mr. Grease,
you know, he's a great symbol of misery because he's alone in the world and he can't enjoy anything, and all he has is his wealth. And it's a moral to say that if you're wealthy enough, then you have nothing because you're completely on your own.
Find your own analogy for that in Ashwin and Indian cricket.
It bewilders me when I hear commentators say, I've got the Midas Touch.
Probably because me, like most, would assume that it
means a good thing.
That it means a good thing, not knowing the extra level of detail that you do.
But that's what King
Don't
Midas
judge
thought.
us.
King Midas thought it meant a good thing. He said, I would like everything I touched to turn to gold, and that is not a ticket for a good time. All right, so that's where they are in terms of the West Indies India situation. Sri Lanka are playing Pakistan as well. How many Test matches have they pumped through Galle?
Yeah. Well, they played in Galle last year, didn't they? When Pakistan went through straight after when we were there, they played back to back at Galle, and it feels like that's the only Test venue right now for Sri Lanka, at least while they've got this period of instability more generally in the country. And Galle's a place that's set apart, I suppose, in a way, it never felt like when we were at Galle that it was anywhere near as hot and heavy as it was in the capital, right?
And who would be happier than Prabhat Jayasuriya, the left-arm spinner, who's played, I think, all but one of his tests at Galle. He's taken almost all of his wickets there. He hasn't got to bowl yet because Sri Lanka are batting first, so they're 242 for 6. Big Frankie Runes, Dimith Karunaratne made 29 at the top. Angelo Matthews, 64, probably complaining about people in the radio box again. And Dhananjaya is on 94.
Yes.
Not out when they resume, but they've had a lot of rain in there as well, so it's been a slow match. So there will be more opportunities for Prabhat Jayasuriya to extend his lead. Currently the fastest wicket taker in terms of wickets per test ever. He's at like 7+ per test match. That's on the old Clary Grimmett index.
Yeah.
So
what was Grimmett per test?
5.9, 6 or something like 5.94.
I thought you were going to do it to 17 decimal points.
like Pi Day.
Pi, yeah.
I'm not quite that bad, but yeah, just under 6 for Clary, and there are 1 or 2 over 6 just, and then there's Prabhat at 7 point something at the moment. So all of that to come in Galle, which is now the global home of Test cricket. More Test matches played at Galle.
We should embrace the fact that there is so many 2 Test series, as much as we hate them being played at the moment, because this is what the World Test Championship's all about. The fact that we've got 3 Test series being played concurrently, that's what won't happen once the World Test Championship gets torn apart. So let's hope that we can preserve this and embrace it as long as we can.
Let's have one more break, and then we're going to look at all the domestic cricket things that have been happening around bits of the world.